Welcome to Sex on the Floor podcast. This podcast was created to help educate the public about problems with sex and intimacy and how this is tied to both physical and mental aspects. Hosted by myself, Dr. Molly Hart, a passionate pelvic floor physical therapist and owner of Pelvic Balance Physical Therapy, and by Dr. Katie Schubert, a phenomenal sex therapist and owner of Cypress Wellness Center. We are here to have a good time. We're here to keep it real with you all and to educate along the way. I'm so excited for you to join us. We strive to help many relationships prosper in fun, safe, and healthy intimacy. While listening to the show, please remember that this information is not meant to diagnose or treat any medical conditions. Please speak with your medical provider for all things related to your health care.
Welcome to Sex on the Floor. My name is Dr. Katie Schubert, and this is Dr. Molly Hart. And today we are extending our conversation that we started in the last episode about how to talk to your children about their bodies. And today we'll be talking about how to talk to your children about their sexuality or sexual relationships.
Yes, I'm excited. So let's dive in. I don't know where this conversation is fully going to go yet, but I'm really excited for it.
So we thought this was a really important topic. I guess I primarily thought this was a very important topic because I work with clients like really exclusively in regard to their sexuality and their sexual relationships. And it's really astonishing how little adults seem to know about sex and their sexual bodies. And that education starts early. It starts with their parents, your parents, and what you're taught when you're, still an adolescent. So we're here to help you through that rough phase. I know a lot of parents struggle talking about this with their children. So we're just here to help give you some pointers, some ideas, some tips, some things to think about when you're entering that phase with your children.
Yeah. And I'll just say, not to say this to make you fearful by any means, but to be aware of the consequences as a parent when you don't address this. If you feel uncomfortable and you're like, I don't know how to do this, I'll just let them figure it out on their own, you are going to have consequences to that. Your child will have consequences. And so something that I see a lot of is I get a lot of young women in my office who have saved themselves for marriage, who finally get married, and they can't have sex with their husband because they have pain, and there's just an incredible amount of shame because it was really never talked about. And when it was talked about, sex was only talked about in a very negative light, and don't do it, save yourself for marriage. And that's the only message they got. And so their brain, even though they're married now, it does not just switch and it's like, oh, now it's safe, it's free, it's fine, I can just have fun with this. It doesn't work that way. You have set your daughter up for a total and utter failure when it comes to her sexual life with her husband. And I'm not trying to be harsh, but I'm just going to be really honest. So if you want to talk to your child about sex and you do want to have harsh rules of when you want them to wait, that's okay. But you do need to then also talk about it in a more loving and kind way as well, and talk about the positivities of it and how beautiful it can be when you enter into it with marriage. Because when there's only one message, which is like, let's not talk about it, it's shame and it's negative, don't do it, it's a really big problem that can start to occur once they're married. And that can affect you having your grandbabies that you want so much, right? Like I see couples all the time. They're like, my parents don't know what's going on. They keep asking me about when we're going to have babies, and they have no idea that we're not even able to have sex. And it becomes this huge, awful, shameful stigma that this couple has to hold on to and not tell anybody about. Because how do you tell your family, like, yeah, we haven't had a kid in 2 years because we can't even have sex? I mean, how do you talk about your family with that, who never even talked about sex in the first place? So this is a really big problem. And I think it's important that we dive into this topic to help you guys navigate a safer, more positive way to hopefully help your children succeed when it comes to their sexual life, whether it is out of marriage or in marriage, and however that viewpoint for you stands.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think to start, children in my experience start asking questions fairly early. My 4-year-old just asked a question about who's allowed to touch mommy's vulva. So, and I answered her honestly. I said, Daddy is the only one that's allowed to touch mommy's vulva.
Yeah.
She proceeded down the list. Well, can I touch your vulva? Can leave her brother touch your vulva? And I answered her. So I mean, the first thing to do when kids start asking questions as it relates to sexual bodies is by answering honestly and age appropriately, right? Like she didn't need to know that, vulvas are for, touching vulvas amounts to pleasure. She's not that's not an age appropriate response. I just answered her question honestly, and that was enough. I don't know what will come next, but I will continue to answer her honestly and give her as much information as she wants. So I stopped answering her questions as soon as she stopped asking questions. And that's really how it should go. We talked about this when we were discussing genitals with kids and discussing bodies with kids. And I had mentioned it's just really important to answer openly and honestly so you don't cause, shame, so that kids don't learn that they can't ask those questions. I want her to ask those questions. I want her to be knowledgeable. So in that same conversation, I told her what she in turn asked, like, who can touch my vulva? So, I told her, mommy and daddy can if we're helping you clean. And doctors can if mommy and daddy are there. But if anybody else touches your vulva, you need to tell mommy or daddy right away because that's not allowed. So we had that whole conversation, which will then, keep her safe moving forward.
Yeah. I love all of that, what you said. And just like you said, just answer it very directly. And the biggest thing is don't create shame. Like we do not want, if you really want to mess up a child, start to create shame around any part of their body. And we do this inadvertently with the genital region. And so if you're able to answer honestly, like Dr. Katie just mentioned, and just be more open about it and not give off a tone of voice and body language that really your child can pick up on that. So if you notice that you're doing that, work on it. Like try to find a way to ask yourself these questions of like, why is this so hard for me to talk about? Probably because you have your own shame when it comes to the body. But try to not pass that on to your child and keep it this beautiful, loving relationship. You really want your children to have a beautiful, loving relationship with all parts of their body, which includes the genital region. And yes, that can be involved in sex. It can be involved in our sexuality. But as long as we feel comfortable with that, I think that yields a human who's really comfortable in their body that they were given. Mm-hmm. Some people want to shield their kids from the real world and what's going on. So let's say I want to shield my child from the fact that there is a possibility of two men being together and having a family, or two women being together. I mean, that is your priority as a parent to do that. You're allowed to do that. But it is also important to understand and question yourself. Your child one day will find out that there are gay couples and lesbian couples. So when are they going to find that out? And when they find that out, who is going to be educating them and teaching them about it? So you're taking a huge risk if you want to not talk about it and shield them. You are taking a huge, huge risk that now one day they're going to find out and you don't know who's teaching them and what they're learning. And so if you want to actually have more control over the situation and help your child understand the real world and all the different dynamics of families we have, I do think it's important to address it and talk about it. And then you can share your viewpoint and your beliefs and your religious ideology on it as well, but at least talk about it versus not mentioning it at all. I guess that's something I've noticed.
Yeah. Just keep in mind also that they're not, we're in Florida and oftentimes they're not learning it in schools, right? The schools aren't teaching them this. Mom and dad may not be teaching them this. It's probably their peers that are teaching them this. Mm-hmm. And you do not want your 10-year-old being taught by other 10-year-olds.
No.
Or 10-year-olds being taught
TV,
by
or
YouTube.
like from a
Yeah.
TV show, right? Or a movie. So like remember,
Yeah.
if you're not the one teaching, they're going to learn guaranteed, and you have no clue how they're learning. Like we know a lot of people learn about sexuality from porn. A lot of people learn about the penis and the vagina and the way it's supposed to look and the vulva from porn because it's not talked about. So just remember again, there's consequences for not talking about these uncomfortable things that need to be talked about.
Yeah. And you know, also on that note, the strange myths that kids circulate when it comes to sex and pregnancies and STIs are baffling.
Yeah,
There are some ideas of how to cure yourself if you have an STI, or how not to get pregnant, that are completely inaccurate, and also very, very unsafe. So, I mean, I know as parents, we only ever want the best for our children, you know, and that's regardless of, you know, where we sit on this topic. You know, the one thing that most parents can agree on is that you want your children to be safe and healthy and happy.
mm-hmm.
And, you know, to keep your children safe, healthy, and happy, you need to teach them about medicine, right? Like, so what happens if you get chlamydia,
Yeah.
right? You can't cure that by douching in bleach, or you know, doing other absurd things. You cure it by taking you know, an antibiotic.
Yeah.
Or like how not to get pregnant. You know, there's rumors, there's myths. You can't get pregnant if you have sex in water. Also inaccurate. Or you can't get pregnant when you're on your period. You know, usually well, you know, whatever, there are cases for everything. But it's really important just to teach your children accurate science about, you know, their bodies and how to prevent things and how to manage things once they occur.
Yeah, and to teach them to, you know, what happens when what happens. So yes, if you have sex, if you have unprotected sex, it can lead to it being pregnant and having a baby. Like, what are the actual consequences of doing certain activities and acts? I've heard of things like, if you come, like I've heard this before, oh, if he comes on me, then I could get pregnant. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't work that way. If he comes inside of you, yes. If he comes near the vagina, yes. But if he comes on top of you, no. These are some of my couples who are not married yet and won't have sex because of religious beliefs, but they're doing all this other fun foreplay. So they try to like do all these. It's so funny to me because it's still sex. I'm like, call it what you want, it's still sex. But they'll do all these other fun foreplay activities together, but they're still confused on whether or not that could or could not accidentally cause a baby. I also have some men I've worked with who will not orgasm when they're foreplaying with their partner, because the act of orgasming to them is sinful. And so they just hold it in and they get really close and they hold it in, which we know we term that as blue balls, right? But what actually ends up happening for a lot of these men is they come in to see me because they create tremendous pelvic pain because of this. So it creates a true physiological problem for your son if he's doing this behavior of like not like getting close to it, but not actually ejaculating. So that's not a good behavior to get into either. And want to know what my protocol is? Go home and masturbate and actually orgasm. And then they come back 2 weeks later and their pain is gone. So, I mean, I'm not kidding. I've had to do this probably 3 different cases. And I remember telling myself, I was like, never did I think I would have to tell a man that he needs to go home and masturbate. Like, I just never thought that'd be part of my job, but it is.
I say that so much.
I'm like, okay. But anyways.
Yeah, so I see that a lot too, kind of in a different way. Men come in with all sorts of ejaculatory issues because of their brain, right? So either they can't ejaculate or they ejaculate too quickly. And a lot of that has to do with just anxiety around sex and ejaculation and their partner's pleasure or displeasure. But I would say that the most amount of that comes from just, you know, faulty education early on. So not communicating with their partner, and even before that, their parents not talking to them openly about sex and what healthy sexual relationships look like. And that often translates into a whole bunch of relationship issues down the road.
Yeah. Absolutely. I remember, just on the topic, funny story. I will never forget that when I was younger, I had asked my dad about sex, and he told me that sex occurs when you pee on each other. Like, that's how you make a baby, you pee on each other. And I remember going to my best friend Deanna and being like, I just found out like how you make a baby is when you pee on each other. And she was so excited. I have no idea how old we were, but we were really young, so young that we were still taking baths together. And I remember we took a bath that night together at her house, and her mom stepped out of the room and she's like, why don't we pee on each other right now and we can make a baby? And she was so excited. And I remember panicking, like panicking, because I was like, I don't want a baby. And she's trying to literally pee on me because she wanted to have a baby. And I was so freaked out that I was accidentally going to create a baby. So like when I say, and I still remember this, I'm 32 years old, I still remember this like core childhood memory because it just scarred me. So when I say like talk honestly, like do talk honestly, because these weird stories and not talking about it confuses little kids beyond belief. And they might be
I think there's a South Park episode with that exact rumor in it.
Oh my God, really? I'm like, maybe that's where it's from. I don't know.
Hilarious. So I think that probably answers a lot of like the what do I do when my kids first start asking questions about sex. But like once your kids enter into sexual relationships, whatever that sexual relationship looks like, right? It could be foreplay, it could be actual penetration. I think it's also really important, as Molly said in the very beginning, to talk to your children about what you need to do to ensure a healthy sexual relationships, right? Not just the how to prevent STIs, not just the how not to get pregnant, but how to talk to your partner about sex and desire and arousal and all of the beautiful things that come with having sex with somebody.
Yeah. I know for me, and this is just me, I've already thought about this. I want to really teach my daughter when it's age appropriate that sex is actually an incredible thing. It's so fun to do with somebody that you love, and it can be used as quality time together. I do want her to understand the love languages. So this is like physical and quality time together is really what it is. I don't want there to be any shame. I more so want to teach her it's so special. I do want you to be mindful of who you're giving this special gift to, because it isn't something I want her just to give to anybody. I'm going to make sure she really understands that like men are hardcore after it. Like they really want sex. I do want her to understand that they will do anything and everything to try to get it. And I want her to view it like this little gold jewel, like this little trophy that she only gives to who deserves it. That's how I'm going to present it versus it being this shameful thing. Don't do it ever. I don't want her to think that way. I want her to think about it like it's this badass, amazing thing that her vagina is. And keep it sacred for who you think deserves to have it. And I will talk to her openly about birth control. And this is me. This is how I'm going to address it. Because I'm a very sex positive person. I was raised in a very sex positive household. I realize now using that terminology, which is so funny because I was raised Catholic, like Italian Catholic, but my mom was just very sex positive. My whole family on that side, I realized, is very like just very free with their sexuality, which you don't know when you're growing up, but I know that now as an adult. Anyways, I enjoyed sex. I enjoyed sex when I was in high school, and I have zero shame about it. And so I am going to have that open conversation with my daughter about that, but I do really want to talk about birth control appropriately. You know, I was on birth control. I remember my mom taking me to the GYN and telling the gyno I wanted birth control and trying to shove it in my purse and hide it so my mom wouldn't know. And my mom knew, and she's like, "What is that?" And I go, "It's birth control." And she's like, "I thought you weren't having sex." And I was like, "Well, I'm not. I was having sex." I was like, "Well, I'm not." But it's just in case. And she's like, "Well, just in case what?" I go, "Well, just in case, we end up having sex." And so she didn't shame me. She's like, "Okay." I think she knew, but she just kind of left it. That's how she decided to parent. And so with my daughter, I want to be more proactive in talking about birth control. I personally, being a pelvic floor PT, hate birth control, like the pill, the IUDs. I do. I think they really screw up the female body because they do. But that's for a whole nother topic. So I was on Yaz birth control, which is estrogen progesterone, for years. Like when I say years, I mean for like probably 10 years of my life. And it was fine. And then in college, when I was in grad school, my blood pressure started getting really high and I didn't know why. I thought it was stress related. One of my GYN appointments, I found out, she's like, oh, I think it's your birth control. The second she took me off, my blood pressure was actually lower than typical levels. And then she put me on an IUD. That IUD messed me up so bad. I was on it for 3 months. I got horrible acne, which I'd never had in my life, all over my face and my back. I got depressed and I gained like 15 pounds. And so of course I quickly got that out. And after that, at the time I was in a relationship with my husband, we were not married yet. And I came home, I'll never forget this, after getting it ripped out and saying, I was like, I'm done with birth control. I'm not screwing up my body anymore to prevent us from having a child. Go get condoms. I don't care what you get, but go get them. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. That's going to be our birth control. And then from then on out, that is what we have used for birth control. That's just my preference because I'm not going to put my body through that anymore. So with my daughter, this is where, I don't know if you have any advice on this, Katie. I struggle because I want her to understand she can take the pill or an IUD, but there are going to be consequences to that for her physical human body. But I know that then she's on birth control. Or do I say, if we can use condoms, but like you have to be responsible. I don't know that I feel confident that a 16, 17, 18-year-old is going to be responsible for using a condom personally. I don't know what your thoughts.
So when it comes to like the side effects of birth control, you know, all I'm thinking about right now is my little daughter running around at 16 years old. Do I want the side effects of birth control or do I want the side effects of unwanted pregnancy?
Exactly.
You know, the physical, the psychological. And no, whether or not she would choose at 16, this is crazy to think about, to abort a baby or have a baby, either road you go down,
so I agree. I think about the risk to benefit ratio. And for me, I'm like, I think there is more benefit to birth control, like a pill or an IUD. I think there's for sure is more, for me personally, there is more benefit to that than relying on condoms. But I am going to educate her like, hey, whenever you feel like you are in a relationship where you feel you can be responsible and that man can be responsible, because it's going to be more of the male pushing it than anything, often cases. When you feel that's the case and you want to get off of it, like get off of it as soon as you feel that is a safe route to take. And that might be when she's in her 20s. I don't know when that'll be. Maybe she won't be very sexual. Maybe she'll be somebody who's not very excited by sex. Who knows how she'll be? I have no idea. But I'm going to allow the freedom versus me controlling and just talk about whatever it is that comes up. Because the thing is like, we are humans. We are biologically wired to be attracted typically to the other sex and to want to have sex and to want to kiss and to cuddle. And that doesn't happen after 18 when they're out of your house. Like, no, that's going to happen at a younger age, whether you want to think about it or not, it's going to happen.
Yeah. So I think that birth control, at least for those years that they're at heightened risk because their impulse control is low, they're not thinking through things, their hormones are out of control. If they're having heterosexual sex at that age, like I would absolutely get them on birth control, just in that short window of heightened risk. And then when they're able to think more rationally and their impulse control levels, their prefrontal cortex has developed, in their mid-20s, then perhaps, say, okay, well, these are the side effects of birth control. This is your body. You do what you want to do with it. But that prefrontal cortex, it's not fully developed. I think, Molly, you would know better than I would with 23, 24, 25.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. And so what does that mean, prefrontal cortex? What that means is your prefrontal cortex is your logical thinking. And so that logical thinking is what helps dampen your the impulse control, right? It's that impulse control. And so if it's not fully developed, that's why you see teenagers do the most stupid things ever, and why it's scary being a parent to a teenager, because they're not thinking about the consequences. They're not necessarily thinking, if I do this, this, and that, this is what's going to happen. They're just feeling something and they're acting on it. So like you said, if I'm with my boyfriend and I'm 16 and he's making me feel all loved and wonderful and he tells me he loves me and I'm like, oh my God, I want to give him everything. I want to give him this gift. I'm just going to have sex with him. And I'm not going to use a condom. I know I'm supposed to use a condom. No, like they're not thinking properly because that part of the brain isn't developed fully yet. And so we have to remember, no matter what you want for your child, they're still in this human body with this human brain, and this human brain has faults to it. And so let's be prepared and understanding those faults and talk about what could happen and how can we try to help prevent the negative consequences that can come from the stupidity of that prefrontal undeveloped cortex.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think another important thing that we haven't talked about yet is, the sexuality spectrum and what to do if your child comes out as gay to you. How to handle it as a parent, because, there are a lot of teenagers, children, adolescents, whatever, who come out, either on that gender spectrum or the sexuality spectrum. And I can't stress enough how important it is for parents to do their research on what their kids are talking about. Kids today have access to so much information. So usually by the time they come to their parents with this information, they have done so much research to help them understand who they are and what they want out of life. And so they're way ahead of you at this point. So it's really important for parents to sit down with each other, by themselves, whatever feels most supported, and do their research and come up with questions that you have for your child. What does this mean? And don't feel badly for asking questions. Your kid will likely be very happy that you're curious about, what they want, or who they are. So come up with questions. Ask your kid how you can best support them. Have open discussions about, what sex looks like for them, given the fact that you've done a lot of research on your own. Do what you need to do to be the best kind of support for your child. And that it might change. It's called a spectrum for a reason. That people move all over the spectrum throughout their life. But it is important for you to be supportive at the time your child comes out to you, for however long, that needs to be.
Yeah. I think a key thing to highlight with what Dr. Katie said is be curious. So always, whenever anybody that you're in a relationship with, whether it's your spouse or your child, like we're talking about, is when they bring up a topic that feels uncomfortable for you or that you don't know about, the most important thing you can always do is just be curious. So asking those questions, trying to understand where they're at, and keeping that open, loving dialogue. Another thing that I recently, somebody said this and I thought it was so profound, is if you're one of those parents who is very strict religiously with how you want to raise your children, that's okay. But just remember, do you want to put the strict rules of a higher priority than the relationship? Because you can't prioritize both of those equally. There really is one or the other. So what I mean by that is, are the rules so important that I am willing to actually sever this relationship because you're not following in line with my rules? Or do I want to be curious and listen to the fact that you are not going to follow my rules? You're going to think differently and be a different human than I've raised you to be. And I'm going to be curious and listen and try to support you and love you for that, so I maintain my relationship with you. And then, yes, that these are my rules that I've had, but I am respecting and understanding that these are your rules for how you're governing your life and your body. And then depending on the age, if they're 16 and you're not happy with how they're living life, well, that's a problem, yes, because they're still under your house. So that's something you guys would have to figure out is, am I okay with them living here and not following my rules? Or do I want them to move out and they can go live their life as is? That's a different, that's kind of a hard part, because when do you think kids really start to defy parents' guidelines and rules and start to kind of like go off on their own, I guess I should say? What
in
age?
terms of what?
Like,
Sexuality?
not even just like, yeah, sexuality for sure. But even just like everything, like sexuality, the music, the people they hang out with, the way they eat. When
I
you
mean,
feel
I
that
think it
starts to
depends on
really go
I
on,
think it
sorry.
depends on I think it depends on what you're talking about, right? Because I haven't been able to control my 4-year-old since the day she was born. So, but if, if we're talking about something like sexuality, I think if you think about like when you started feeling sexual for the first time, usually between the ages of 10 and 13 is when kids become themselves sexually.
Okay.
um
So
that
puberty.
yeah, around puberty. And I think that that's probably when a child's sexuality becomes more solid to them, when they're able to feel the feelings and then give it a name. Just like anybody else, right? Like when we're exploring our sexuality, we come to realize, okay, well, I guess, I'm heterosexual. I remember having that very thought when I found myself first attracted to men. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm heterosexual. I can stop wondering about that, because I had friends that were older, um, who weren't heterosexual. And I always wondered, oh, I wonder if I'm, if I'm gay, or I wonder if I'll be attracted to women. And then I became attracted to men, and I was like, okay, well, that answers that question. And that
Yeah.
was around 13.
Yeah. I remember at that age, I never asked myself, am I, like, I never remember thinking I'm heterosexual. I just was attracted to men. I just always knew I was attracted to men. But yeah, okay. So around 13 is when you think that that sexuality starts to come out. I think the struggle for a lot of parents is going to come into really the parameters that you want for your child when it comes to how they express their sexuality when it gets to that time frame. So like let's say 13 to 18, and how they decide to express it, and how you are okay or not okay with how they're expressing it. So I don't know how to navigate that fully because I'm not there.
Hard. That's a really hard part of parenting, because as you mentioned before, sometimes it comes in direct conflict with how you think your kids should be. But one thing that I have noticed through years of counseling with families and kids that, or teens that are gay, is that the only thing that will help children or teens is having supportive families. It doesn't matter if the parents feel like their children are doing something in direct conflict of who they want them to be. The suicide rates for gay kids is sky high. Depression, anxiety, also sky high for gay kids. It's so incredibly important that parents put their beliefs aside to support their kids, because as I mentioned, the one thing that all parents want is for their kids to be healthy and happy. And the thing I run up against the most is parents saying, okay, well, my kid's not going to be happy if they're gay, right? Like they need to be with an opposite sex person, whatever, to be happy and healthy. And so they want the best for their kids, but they're coming at it at an angle that isn't correct.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say parenting isn't correct, but I do know the statistics behind mental health and kids with unsupportive parents, and it doesn't look so good for them. Right?
Yeah.
Often
Never
struggle.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, after they leave the house, it's not good.
Yeah, I think, like you said, being supportive, being curious, and again, really as the parent, understanding your beliefs and your set of rules, and understanding that your child did not create those set of rules. You did. And they're different. Like I view, this is just my viewpoint. I view us as a soul inside of a little beautiful physical human body. And I'm challenged to raise Mela, who is her own little soul, and Clark, who is his own little soul. And they're in these cute little bodies that they're in. And I'm going to teach them about it, and I'm going to raise them, but they are not going to be little mini me's. They are their own people, and I'm helping to guide them until they're old enough to be on their own. And I don't know what their journey is. I don't know how they want to express themselves. I can't wait to find out. But I'm not going, for me, I am not going to control them and tell them what they need to do and look like. Like, I am going to teach them to be very intuitive and to really learn who they are within themselves. Because I do believe if you teach your child how to be intuitive, which is listening to yourself, I think you can help your child do that by allowing them to pick. So you give them choices. When they're really young, you always give them choices. Don't pick for them. Even the clothes they wear, like every little thing. If it's a shirt, I'm getting male a dress. What shirt do you want? Like, I'm constantly teaching her to feel really confident. And then whatever she picks, no matter what it is, I was like, good pick. That was a really good choice. And I always am making her feel confident in the choices she's making, because I want her to listen to that little inner voice. Because if you don't do that, if you don't teach your child to be really solid in their own little intuitive voice, they're going to look to you, and eventually they're going to rebel against you because they're not you. And then what they're going to do, because they can't listen to themselves, they're going to look to social media, and they're going to look to see what their friends are doing, and they're going to look to see what Kim Kardashian's doing. And so they're going to start to follow that instead. And that is a recipe for disaster, what actually will lead to a lot of mental health issues, because now they don't really know who they are, and they're just trying to live in the footsteps of all these other people. And so I guess my biggest message I would love, if you're able to, is really try to help build that confidence within your child. And when you realize that who they are isn't who you wanted them to be, who you expected them to be, if you have those, trying to get in that supportive role of loving them and supporting them for who they happen to be, even if it looks different than the child you were hoping for.
Yeah. Well, that's fabulous insight. And I think that that's for, right, all children with all, issues or problems or, developmental milestones.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, okay. Do you think there's anything we didn't hit?
Gosh, probably.
But where do parents go to learn more if their child came to them and said, hey, I think I'm gay, or hey, I think I like women, or hey, I'm asexual? Like, let's say they throw out all these new age terminology, I call it. Where can parents go to learn more after that conversation?
So we actually put together a really fabulous blog article on this very topic. It's on our website, the Cypress Wellness Center website, and maybe we can include the link in the description of this podcast, because there's a whole bunch of resources, like articles, YouTube channels, things like that, about how to talk to your children about sex. And reach out if you need to. There are experts in the field that are happy to help. Unfortunately, in Florida, schools aren't one of those resources, but there are people like me and Molly who can help facilitate those conversations if you need the extra guidance.
Yeah. I have some links I can give you from the sex counseling course that I just took that are really helpful. She's got some blog posts that really break things down. It was good for me to read. I was like, gosh, I don't even know these terminologies the way I need to. So I can send those, and I'll send them to Lindsay, and we can get those listed underneath the blog post. So parents, if you are listening and you have these questions, go on Google, look at these sites, try to inform yourself, because like Dr. Katie said, your child has already massively educated themselves. So ask the questions, do your own research. Doing that shows you love them and you care and you're supportive. So, okay, I hope we covered enough good topics here. If you guys have any questions on this, please send us an email, send us a message. We're here to help in every way that we can.
Yes. And also, if you're enjoying this podcast, give it a like on the Apple Podcasts or the other places where you're listening to the podcast. It helps us grow a little bit too.
Yeah. And please share to your friends. Like, if you are a mom listening and you're like, this was helpful, share it to your girlfriends in your little group chats. Something like, hey, you guys should take a listen. This is great. I know you guys might not want to publicly share it. I'm fine with that, but you can send it in Messenger. You can send it in the text messages feeds.
Yes.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you at the next episode. Have a beautiful rest of your day. We are Dr. Molly Hart and Dr. Katie Schubert, and you've been listening to Sex on the Floor podcast.
We really hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions and want to get in contact with us, you can follow us on Instagram at Dr. Molly Hart and at Dr. Katie Schubert. On Facebook at Pelvic Balance PT and at Dr. Katie Schubert. And for more information about us on our websites, you can find us at pelvicbalancept.com and at drkatieschubert.com.